engineering as well as it is about the economy. The TBM forum that was mentioned earlier consists of many technical associations and societies and thought leaders that have got together over the last year. And we're dedicated to restoring our manufacturing sectors so that we have a balanced economy here in Ontario. So this is our take on things, and we certainly don't disagree with anything the economists have already said, because it's hard to argue with economists, because they're never wrong. They just keep changing the numbers. So why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it for our kids. We're doing it because we believe that we in Ontario need a balanced economy for our children's prosperity. And, you know, as they first start the game that we love, which is hockey, and pick up that first stick, they're going to find it when they read it that it's not made here anymore. That most of our kids are actually going to start thinking perhaps we don't make enough things here anymore in Canada, and certainly in Ontario. That's a concern. It's called globalized manufacturing, and it's something we need to look at. And some questions come to mind about what that globalized manufacturing that we've become used to is really all about. Well, we've moved a lot of stuff offshore in the last 3 decades. Some of us have been part of that. We've gone offshore. We've done it in a very uncontrolled trade manner. It's been herd behavior in a lot of ways. We've gone out the door, following the next guy across the pond to take a look at what we can get. And you know what it's done? It's reduced our manufacturing intensity over the last decade alone by 15%, so that we've got less value added now within our particular manufacturing environment. And those sectors have been hurt. Some of them are more badly than others, but they've been hurt. They've been damaged. But here's a glimmer of hope for the future that probably we need to look at. Let's go forward. Take a look at globalized manufacturing. Let's reconsider what globalized manufacturing really is. For us engineers that think about value and lean and green, let's just think about it. It really is a bunch of ships revolving around the globe, taking materials from one place to another, adding low-cost labor, and then you get these things, these waste machines, these large, wasteful devices that, you know, move non-value-added inventory around the world using and sucking up very expensive and increasingly expensive bunker fuel. There's no manufacturing done on these puppies at all. This is just to move it around. And so where they're going is to places like this, which are supposed to be low-cost countries. They were, but they've got wage escalation in double digits. And they've got sector issues with material supply, and they're growing their economy, and it's beginning to be an expensive proposition. And so as you're going to see, globalized manufacturing has question marks associated with it. Not that it wasn't a good run, but maybe it's transient. So what we should be doing is looking at lean and green, rethinking what manufacturing should be in the future. Well, let's take a look at the global supply chain. It's a busy slide, but it really is a look for any system engineers in the house, because they'll love this stuff. Here's a system of the global supply chain. High waste, not lean, not green. Oh, there's the ships I mentioned. And it's moving around the world, shifting materials from one place to another to grab that low-cost labor. You'll see the cost drivers on the left-hand bottom and the quick process flow on the top right. Nice little model. This is today, when our interest rates, which we hope return to more normal levels from the very depressed interest rate status we've got right now, we're going to find that this thing gets even more expensive to occupy and run. Interest rates will create a high cost of inventory trap for us. We've got a busy problem here with this global supply chain. It's an expensive proposition. Here's an alternative. This may not be sustainable, by the way. This is actually, people talk now about sustainability. This is beginning to look unsustainable. Let's take a look at an alternative strategy. A localized trade bloc. Bring the manufacturing, put it where, as somebody said earlier, where the customers are, and see what happens. We can sink the ships. We don't need them anymore. We get short supply chains, fast response to customers. Look at what those cost drivers have done. They've moved now down to an order of magnitude less. We've reduced the process steps, which is great. And what we now have is the opportunity for local manufacturing to become strong incubators for our innovation, which is what we need. And that's an important part of innovation. We can still do stuff with this. We can still trade our resources to the right people that want them for their own economy. We can do balanced trade outside of the trade bloc for people that want to share the competitive advantage with us. And we can also, for the right reasons, share our knowledge, and as long as our intellectual property is controlled, with others that require a leg up in moving their economies forward. But inside ourselves, we'll now have a balanced economy, an intrinsically less wasteful and lean and green environment for our children. And that includes having manufacturing part of our business, called Canada. We've ran numbers on those two scenarios, the numbers that you are used to seeing for global supply chains and the new one I've just shown you. And they've been ran by many of us over the last year to understand the costs and trade-offs between onshore and offshore. We call that balanced sourcing. Boston Consulting Group have headed up a released document so far that's basically, it's in the news today, by the way, and it says the landed cost parity by 2015 will be here by that point in time, and we'll have no reason to go offshore for manufacturing. There's actually a case now to localize manufacturing on paper. And in fact, what you're going to find is all these corporations are now going to be considering themselves to be recovering globaholics. These guys are going to want to bring stuff back, and you're going to find that they're going to call it reshoring. You read in the newspapers a term called reshoring. In the U.S., it's happening. Reshoring is beginning with large corporations. Demographics are about 50% of them really figuring out how to bring the work to North America. Well, and Canadians, we may have to look at our loonie a little differently because it's far too high to be at the same level as the U.S. dollar, to be at the same tipping point for reshoring. We got a resource-escalated dollar. Jim quoted Dutch disease. So we've got a chance now to participate in this, but are we ready? Well, it's always a question. Are we ready? So here's a roadmap for you to be ready. And by the way, this could create some discussion, but I love that stuff. Let's take the three people to have a piece to say about this in our environment, and you know who they are. And let's get some bold policies together. I won't go through them all, but we certainly need to embrace a return toward a localized trade bloc. I'm not saying all the work should come back. It should still be looked at in terms of using that balanced sourcing model I mentioned. But we certainly need to be aware of what's happening. Let's take a look at our capital investment. Let's get it out of those dangerously stupid housing bubbles that we've got and move them back into manufacturing where they belong so that we've got some value-added industries to give our kids. And let's fix and implement the following, and this is a big one. Let's take a look at our integrated apprenticeship systems that we need for the future. And let's refocus on an integrated apprenticeship program that's a complete integrated career pathway for our kids when they leave school so they can have a job, a trade, a profession, and they actually can become part of the new way of manufacturing if, in fact, we all agree it should be part of Ontario's economy, which I think we do. So manufacturing also needs these people, and they need them quickly to be in place before the baby boomers, like me, retire, because then we're going to have a bigger hole to fill if we don't move quickly. Manufacturing's image, of course, is a problem. We know it's got to change. It's perceived to be dark, dirty, dangerous. We know that the manufacturing of the future won't be like the manufacturing of the past. It's going to have new technologies, new ways of doing things, etc. But we must change its image and get it to be something like this. We need, some industries already are like this. We need new industries that are much more clean and green and so on, in keeping with the strategy. Let's make manufacturing sexy. Let's make sure we attract the next generation of manufacturers and entrepreneurs so that we've got what we need to have. Let's make sure industry has the right innovation levels, which has been talked about a lot. Let's look at making sure we run the numbers, which is our balanced sourcing strategies. And here's the big one. Let's make sure we've got a mindset for continuous improvement. A lot of industries have gone offshore and forgotten how to continuously improve what they do, and we're going to have to re-inject the mindset for continuous improvement into our management. As well as investing in the correct technology and capital requirements, let's rebuild the manufacturing communities or clusters, call them what you will, but we need them to be installed into our environment so that our manufacturers, our local supply chains can learn from each other and become incubators for the next generation of products. We put together an evolution plan that's a step-by-step process, a very detailed get-well plan for industry using our experts. And the first step is a self-positioning survey because we've got to get that sick, dead, and dying manufacturing sector analyzed in terms of the diseases they've got, fix them up, give them new medicine, and get them up flying again like this guy on the right. If we can do that, we stand a chance. And I think the message from the economist earlier and from ourselves here is that we got to push the red button on manufacturing and get it into the right place. There's an opportunity for manufacturing to come back based on the reports I've just given you. But we got to re-engineer it. It won't be the same manufacturing that went away. It's the manufacturing of the future. It's got to be re-engineered for our economy. Please do it for two things. Do it for the province, and very certainly do it for your children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I should point out that Nigel wins the On Time Award. I think all three speakers have done an excellent job of identifying the problem and suggesting action to take solutions to solve the problem. I actually had a set of prepared questions, and I see all but one of them has actually been answered. I do have one that's not answered, but I want to give the audience a time to ask any questions. We've got about 10 minutes. I see the usual suspects getting up. Please identify yourself and get right to the question. Oh, maybe not. Okay. I'll prompt by posing a very broad question to all three speakers. What new technologies do you think will move manufacturing to be more competitive in the global marketplace? Nigel, you want to go first?
Technology will move us. In the short term, we need to get back into continuous improvement and lean. Productivity is the driver. We can't compete just by asking government for handouts. So we've got to continuously improve. Some of the technologies I got in mind would be rapid prototyping technologies, which covers a lot of different things, that 3D printing, for example. We've got to be better at getting the next generation of product to our customer base quicker, and we've got to beat the competitor at tool making. So anything that moves the rapid prototyping forward would be one technology. But then when you get to the operation itself, I think we have to look at a management technology of continuous improvement. It's not all to do with science. It's also to do with our technology of thought that we need to install into our thinking. We've lost a lot of ground in terms of making ourselves productive. So it's rapid prototyping and continuous improvement are two technologies come to mind.
Yeah. Is it on? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Just following on a sort of point that Nigel brought up in his presentation, I think another important technological element in the manufacturing processes is the energy supply. And I think the ability to have a green and effective energy distribution system that can provide a reliable and cost-effective energy source for our manufacturers will be, I think, very important in ensuring its sustainability over the longer term.
Jim?
And using less of it.
Yeah. And I think that energy environment nexus applies also to the rest of the manufacturing process in terms of how the manufacturers are produced, the nature of the product that's produced, and how it's used in the end. So to take the auto as an example, there's all kinds of ways in which both the manufacture of autos and then the nature of the auto and its subsequent use will be improved necessarily around environmental issues going forward. So I think the energy and environment area is one with a huge amount of potential, but linking back to my initial point, it won't happen by itself. It'll only happen if we're very proactive and deliberate at saying this is an area we're going to carve out a niche in for Canada.
Thanks very much. Okay, we have three questions on the floor. Can we start with the center speaker?
Okay. My question, it's not really directed at anybody, but it was brought up by Jim Stanford. Sort of when we were talking about how we want to really focus inward on where we bring in our contracts and our manufacturing from, that sort of thing. I think it's fantastic. But in cases like when we say, okay, we want to buy 50,000 trains or something, or 50 trains, let's say, that almost exclusively goes to Bombardier. And while there's nothing wrong with that, it sort of can lead to a lack of competitive offers from other sector or other companies that may exist out of Canada. So how do we deal with that kind of monopolization that can come from like having one big company in Canada?
I'll just Just on that point around procurement processes in Canada, they already are fairly open and competitive, and whenever a tender goes out, generally there are some Buy Canadian quotas in there that sort of are consistent with international trade rules. And, you know, in the case of Bombardier, it's an international player in rail and urban transit production, so they get a lot of contracts in Europe as well. So in that case, it's just a case of internationally, there's only sort of a limited number of big players in that transit field, and Bombardier happens to be one of them, and you know, naturally they're going to get a substantial portion of those contracts.
I'll answer that. You may only have one prime contractor for an event like that, but there's a lot of subs and a lot of suppliers within that. And it moves us to make sure that they get a shot, and that even if a prime contractor thinks it's happy with supply base, which may be offshore, that we force them to, by clever resource reviews, to take a look at the food chain that they got locally. So, you know, I would say if you're the government, you're giving a contract to a large prime, you would say, okay, what's your rule base for handing out the work down into the subs, and make sure that's completely exercised so that we've got a competitive supply base below the prime.
Okay, first speaker on my left.
My name is John Clayton, Famex Engineering, and I happen to be a failure analyst, forensic engineer. That means I look at mistakes that other engineers make. Not that there are very many, but plenty to keep people in work, though. And one of the things that worries me, what I've heard is very, very interesting, and it's the sort of thing I've been asking. I'd like to refer to the tar sands. The tar sands, of course, have been, or will be at some point, be pumped literally thousands of miles away from where they're produced. And I want someone to tell me what the energy balance is in this process. First of all, they go through an upgrader, which produces a product which is lower in sulfur, but amazingly corrosive. In the short distance pipeline that's already being built in Alberta, within the first 10 months, there were 10 major leaks. Nobody's told me what's being done about that. Secondly, to get it pumpable at all, you have to heat it. There's another energy waste. Then, still to get it pumpable, you have to dilute it. Not only do you have to dilute it, but you send the diluent all the way down to Texas, and then you pump it all the way back again to recycle it. I can't see for the life of me where the energy gain, it's all lost. I mean, you've got to build the pipeline first. Overall, it's a huge waste of energy. Obviously, it should be processed here, or at least somewhere in Canada.
I think you better ask our government that question, because they seem more interested in the tar sands than the manufacturing right now.
Good answer. My other speaker on the left.
Ruben Schlossberg, Mode Center. And along somewhat similar lines, the current Canadian bitumen rush was something of a boogeyman in all three presentations, because the natural resources sector competes and may be taking away jobs from the manufacturing sector. It may be taking government investment, R&D investment away from the manufacturing sector. It drives up the Canadian dollar. So is the manufacturing sector and the natural resources sector, are they doomed to duke it out from here until whenever we fall, or is it possible to have a thriving manufacturing sector and a thriving natural resources sector?
I think it is possible. In fact, you know, we as a country are blessed with all these resources buried under our feet, and if we use those resources wisely, it should be an asset for us, and it should be a source of wealth. But the question is, how are we going to use those resources, and are we going to leverage them correctly and manage them correctly and make sure that they are used to build a sustainable, long-term, diversified economy? And right now, that is absolutely not happening. The strategy of making Canada a quick and dirty energy superpower rests on extracting the bitumen as quickly as possible and exporting it in raw form. And that raises all kinds of issues, including the energy and environmental issues that John mentioned. It raises geopolitical issues, and it raises economic issues, because there's all kinds of side effects of allowing that one very narrow sector of a whole diverse national economy to become overheated in the way that it has. I don't think of it so much as stealing jobs away from manufacturing. Canada's manufacturing sector has lost about 500,000 jobs in the last decade. The petroleum industry has added 20,000 jobs in the last decade. So, you know, that's one new job in petroleum for every 25 jobs that was lost in manufacturing. So it isn't that resources are being sucked away. Resources are being left idle because of the unintended side effects of an overheated bitumen boom. And those side effects are felt in many ways, but a very important one is through the impact on the currency. The oil price is clearly the dominant driver of the Canadian dollar. The fair value of our currency, if you look at purchasing power indices, should be about the low 80s US. That's how the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development measures it. And instead, the speculative pressures, both in oil futures markets and in currency markets, have driven it much higher. It isn't because Canada's got a strong trade balance as a result of exporting oil that the currency is high. That would be a complete distortion of the story. In fact, our trade balance has gotten worse the more the oil sands boom has been allowed to continue in this very unregulated, unmanaged way, because the non-resource exports of our country are shrinking much faster than the resource exports are growing. I'm dismayed at how this debate, which I think is essential in Canada, has been politicized. I think of Premier McGuinty's comments, or I think of Tom Mulcair's comments the other day, and then it elicited this incredible outrage, pious response, saying, how dare you suggest that anything that goes on in northern Alberta might not be 100% right for everyone in Canada, trying to drown it out. I found it almost like a kind of McCarthyism in a way, and it's very, very divisive and very short-sighted. I think that the resource wealth that Canada has can be a source of long-run, balanced prosperity across Canada, but not just by opening it up to the highest bidder and saying, go for it, dig it out as fast as you can. If we do it that way, it will hurt us more than it will help us.
Unfortunately, we have to be out of this room at 4 o'clock, and there's 3 people standing for questions. We only have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm with Ministry of Natural Resources, and we've just put out an Ontario Wood logo with the hope of making consumer purchasing choices in Ontario be more locally derived. Do you guys see the future of manufacturing in Ontario purely being linked to economic changes globally, or do you see any consumer purchasing choices from a local purchasing impacting Ontario's manufacturing levels?
I think the consumer locally will score from having local manufacturing. I think, if that's your question, the flexibility offered by local manufacturing to the consumer is profound. Things like seasonal products will be easier to manage if you've got local manufacturing than shipping them halfway across the world. Flexibility in terms of being able to offer variable products to people. The ability to respond to a customer's specialty needs if it's manufactured locally. I guess if you wear eyeglasses when you were my age, when you were young, you waited 3 weeks for the eyeglasses to come from the factory. Now you get them in an hour from the store. No wonder I was blind. So, you know, I mean, there's a consumerism thing where we put the factory in the store for eyeglasses. Just take that and extend it to other manufacturing strategies that we could bring to the party. You want something a different color, or you want something slightly different in size. Theoretically, we could make that in the back of the store. I'm just dreaming, but that's the kind of stuff the consumers got for the consumer if we become manufacturable, rather than just order and you wait for the ship to come in.
I apologize, the 2 people still standing, but we still have to have time for closing remarks. The speakers will be out in the foyer, and we'll be more than happy to answer questions individually.